I know this channel mostly revolves around poker hands, casinos, etc., which makes sense, you know, since it is a poker vlog. But I wanted to switch it up today for just a minute because I'm feeling especially grateful this week. This is my third day in Austin, Texas, and I realize it's because of all your continued support that I'm able to do stuff like this. Travel, play cards, bring you guys along for the journey. If you told me 2 years ago when I first started making videos that at one point there would be over 60,000 people who want to see me play cards, I would have just laughed at you, but somehow it's come true. So I just wanted to say thank you to all you guys. And with that being said, welcome to Austin. I know that was a little bit of a corny intro, but you know, as long as it's just once in a while, I think it's not too bad, right? Anyway, today's video is going to be a bit of a longer one because I'm going to go over 3 different sessions that I've played here in Austin, Texas. I figured why not just come to this beautiful park and tell you guys about each of the 3 days. I know you guys don't really seem to mind these longer videos, so why not? On Wednesday, I played 1-3 on the lodge's live stream. Yesterday, Friday, I played at the lodge, but it wasn't on live stream. Ended up jumping into a 1-3 and a 5-5 uncapped. I got hands from that session. And tonight is the grand finale, if you will, where I'll be playing 5-5-10, probably 5-10-20 at the lodge once again, also on the live stream. So quite a lot of stuff to pack into one video. Without any further ado, let's get into Wednesday's plans, which is some 1-3 no limit action. And if you know Texas, 1-3 isn't really 1-3, right? Let's get to it.
From the Lodge Poker Club in beautiful Round Rock, Texas, welcome to Poker Night at the Lodge. My name is Rick, along with my partner, Mikey the Skull.
All right, guys, here we go. Playing some 1-3 no limit on the stream. The buy-in for this game is $1,000 max, but then it's match the stack, meaning you can buy up to the biggest stack at the table. In the first interesting hand of note, we look down at the best possible hand to start a vlog with and to start a hand with, pocket aces. In this hand, there's a $10 straddle, so we're playing 1-3-10 essentially. I open it up for $30 and get called by the button, small blind, and straddle. Multi-way to a flop of Jack 10-8 rainbow. Action checks to me, and even though this board is a little bit sketchy, even for an overpair, I'm going to keep betting, seeing as there's plenty of worse hands to continue getting value from. So I make it 65 and get called by the button and the straddler. Turn card isn't really too good. It's the King of Spades, which introduces some 2-pair possibilities as well as straights, etc. So when the action checks to me this time, I want to pot control a little bit and check it. Player behind me on the button now decides to bet 125. Small blind makes the call, and I'm not going to fold just yet. So I make the call as well, and we go 3 ways to a river, which is another king this time, the King of Clubs. Once again, action checks to me. No point in betting here, so I check it, but this time the player behind me checks it back. Unfortunately, the small blind flips over King 9, so we're not going to win this first hand. However, I do get some immediate opportunity for redemption. As the very next shuffle, I get dealt pocket queens. This time we see an early position open to $15. Another player calls, and I decide to raise it up to $75, once again in middle position. We see a call from the cutoff, initial raiser, and the player who called the initial $15 raise. 4 ways here to a flop of 10-10-8 with a flush draw. When the action checks to me, I think this is a board where we're either going to be way ahead or way behind, so decide to play this one a little bit deceptively and check it back.
There's the 3 of clubs.
Wow, just a turn card for Mark.
Boat City for Mark.
And Mark's slow playing here, so...
Early position checks again, and now the player behind him decides to lead for 125. Nothing to do but make the call, so that's what I do. Player behind me folds, and now interestingly enough, the player who raised before the flop to $15 decides to check raise all in for around $600. Now the player behind him who bet the turn makes the fold, and actions back to me heads up. Kind of a dicey spot. I feel like most of the time I'll be behind, but maybe sometimes I'll be good against some combo draws or perhaps a pocket pair that he's overplaying, such as pocket jacks or pocket nines. On the other hand though, I do have the worst possible combination of queens, seeing as I have a heart and a club, so it's kind of close, at least for me. As you guys know, when a spot is close, I'm going to put some money in the middle, especially when it's a match the stat game. trying to get as many chips on the table as possible, even if they have to come from my pocket sometimes. So after thinking it over for a bit, I make the call, not really expecting to win too often here, and as predicted, this is not one of those times as we're up against pocket threes. Looking for a 10 or a queen to save this hand, neither of which comes on the river, so gonna lose another one here, and so far overpairs are not doing the trick. Later on, I decide to put on the double straddle, so this hand is a 1, 3, 6, 12, pretty much. Everyone and their mother limps in, and I suddenly look down at pocket jacks in the double straddle. I decide to make it 100 on top. Now early position decides he's all in for $300. Player next to act thinks that's a good idea, so he also goes all in for around 600. Action gets all the way back to me, pretty straightforward call, so that's what I do. Turns out we're up against 6 deuce and pocket eights. The flop brings a sweat, but jacks end up holding up, and we take down the first decently sized pot of this 1-3 game. In the last interesting hand that I played on stream, it was a 1, 3, 6, 12, 25. So a triple straddled pot. There's a player in middle position who limps in before I look down at Jack 10 of hearts in late position. I decide to raise it up to 100 and get called by no less than 5 players. So 6 ways here to a flop, which I'm pretty much done with unless I flop something. Turns out it comes 10 high with a flush draw. So when the action checks to me, I think we rate to have the best hand the majority of the time. Seems worth a bet. So I make it 200 and get no less than 3 callers. Turn card is the king of hearts, obviously not my favorite card, as anyone with the king is now beating my 10. However, it seems pretty unlikely anyone would really have a king after checking and calling a bet on the flop, aside from maybe a king high flush draw that turns top pair. First player checks, and now the guy next to act goes all in for $500. Player behind him folds, and now the action's back to me. Doesn't seem like a great spot, but at the same time we're getting a pretty decent price, and we're up against a player who's been playing the most amount of hands tonight, so he could very easily be playing some worse hands this way. Maybe not all the time, but definitely often enough to justify calling, like I said, especially given this price. So I make the call, player behind me folds, and it turns out we're up against king deuce. A little bit surprising, but maybe it shouldn't be here in Texas. Anyway, he ends up making a full house on the river, so a pair of 10s is not going to cut it. And that was pretty much the last interesting hand of this 1-3 live stream.
Very nice. He loves it. Mariano's still smiling.
So, to summarize that session, as you can see, I didn't really play too many hands. Wasn't that long of a session, actually, only played like 3 or 4 hours. But ended up winning around $200 or $300. So, hard to complain about that, especially after losing with aces and queens. But anyhow, that brings us to the second event of the day, which was yesterday's session back at the lodge. Like I said, not playing on stream this time, but I did bring the camera with me, so let's go play some cards. All right, here we go. Day 2 in Texas. And as mentioned, I played some 5-5 uncapped this day. However, I did play 1-3 a little bit while waiting for a seat in that game. And I did find one interesting hand that I wanted to include here. So before we get to the 5-5, entertain me for a minute, guys, as we pick up pocket aces in a 1-3 game with the $10 straddle on, though. So there's 2 limpers ahead of me. I decided to raise it up on the button to $50. And we see some good news from the small blind on my left, who decides 50 is not enough and bumps it up to $100. Action gets back to the second limper, who decides to call the 100. Obviously a delicious spot for myself. Now it's just a question of how much do we want to raise to. The player in the small blind's only got around 300, I think. But the player on my right, who limped in and then called the 100, he's got around like 2,000, so plenty of money left behind to play for. I like to put in yet another raise. I make it 350. Now the player in the small blind decides to go all in for his remaining 320. Not too surprising. Unfortunately though, the player on my right makes the fold. So we're heads up, all in, no more action to be had. Board comes out 10 high and we end up winning. Not the most exciting of hands, but certainly nice to start the day with pocket aces not getting cracked this time. At this point, I get called for 5-5, so I take my chips over there and decide to add another $10,000 because why not? In the first hand of note, the straddle is on. There's 4 limpers, and I look down at ace-5 offsuit on the button. Pretty marginal to limp in here, but I decided to just do it. Who knows, maybe we'll flop something. Big blind completes and the straddler checks. So multi-way to a flop of 4-3 deuce. We flop the second nuts on a pretty draw-heavy board. So when the big blind leads $40 and a player in middle position calls, I will definitely not be calling. Gonna look to raise this one up, much like I would with a lot of combo draws and maybe some other bluffy stuff. So I make it 175 and get called in both spots. So looking for a clean turn card, which indeed we get. It's the 9 of diamonds, changes nothing at all. Once again, the action checks to me. Now I decide to size up a little bit and make it $500. Player in the big blind folds, but now the player in middle position check raises all in for $1,200. Not much of a decision here. If he's got 6-5, good for him. We're off to a river, which is the 7 of spades. I show it, and we end up chopping against ace-5 offsuit himself. Perhaps a bit anticlimactic, but chopping is certainly better than losing, at least. Moving right along to the next hand, in which the straddle is on, there's a limper in early position, and then the cutoff raises to $40. I look down at king-jack offsuit on the button, probably a hand we can mix between raising and maybe just folding. I decide to raise it up this time. I make it 150, and the cutoff makes the call. So heads up to a flop of 5-3-3 with 2 hearts. He checks it over to me. I decide to bet a third of the pot, and he makes the call. Off to a turn, which is the king of hearts, gives us top pair as well as a flush draw, but it does bring in the front door flush, so when he checks it to me, I decide to check it back and see what he does on the river, which comes the 8 of hearts. So now there's 4 hearts out there, and pretty quickly he leads out for $300. Not really sure what to make of this. It seems like it could very easily be a bluff, although at the same time, people don't really bluff rivers too often, especially at semi-low stakes games. I would have a bunch of worse hands here that can probably find a fold, but this one in particular with the jack of hearts seems like it's gonna be a call, even though obviously we're gonna be behind sometimes. So that being said, I flick in the call, and it turns out this time it's successful as we're up against ace king of diamonds. In the next hand we play a $25 bomb pot, but it's double board and PLO. So quite a lot of action to be had in these, mostly just looking to flop something or get out of the way. In this one I look down at king 9-4 deuce from early position. Top board comes out 4 deuce deuce, bottom is ace 4 deuce. Somehow this pretty mediocre hand ends up making a very strong hand, so when the action's on me, I decide to bet $50 and get 3 callers. Turn cards come the 3 of spades and the king of clubs. This time I decide to check it, and action gets to a late position player who bets $200. I make the call, and a player behind me makes the call. 3 ways to the river cards, which are the 8 of spades and the 7 of hearts. I had the feeling that this time the action would check all the way around, but also that I was at least chopping the pot. So I decided to lead out here for $500. Not really sure if this makes any sense, but as you guys can probably guess, I have no idea what I'm doing at this game, even though it is pretty fun. Turns out we get called in both spots. Player behind me wins the bottom board with ace 7 of spades, and the player in late position wins the top board with pocket 3s. So actually, even though we've got a full house and 2 pair, we are good on neither board, and I guess that's sort of the nature of this 4-card game. Speaking of being clueless when it comes to this game, I don't know much, but I do know that Queen Jack 10-9 double suited is a pretty damn good hand, at least pre-flop. In this next one, that's what I have as we play another $25 PLO double board bomb pot. And this time we find some more good flops, as the top board comes out king 9-5 with 2 diamonds, and the bottom is 10-9-3 with 2 spades. So on the top we've got a straight draw and a flush draw. On the bottom board we've got a straight draw, a flush draw, and top 2 pairs. Can't really ask for better flops than these. Even better news is that we see someone lead for $100, player behind her calls, and now the action's on me. Seeing as I have a very good hand on both of these boards, but not a lot of showdown value on the top since technically I do just have a 9, I decided to drive that equity and maybe get one of these guys to fold. So I pot it, gets back to the first player who bet 100, and she makes the call, leaving herself around $1,000 behind. Player behind her goes all in for less, about 300 maybe. So we're off to see some turn cards here, 3 ways, with one player already all in, but plenty of money left to play for between myself and the initial bettor. Turn on the top is the deuce of diamonds, and on the bottom it's the 4 of diamonds. So we improve to a flush on the top board, and not really much change on the bottom board. Seems to me like I'm going to have the best hand on both of these boards more often than not. So when she checks it to me, she's got around 1,000 left, and I think there's really no play here but to go all in. So that's what I do, and she goes in the tank for about a minute or 2 before eventually deciding to call. So we're off to see some river cards here. Top one is the 5 of spades, pairing the board. Bottom is the 8 of diamonds, giving us the nuts with Queen Jack. I flip it over. Unfortunately, this time we're chopping it as she had pocket kings. King, King, Queen 5 to be exact. So a pretty big pot, but unfortunately chopping this one down the middle, which is another thing that's very common in these double board bomb pots. You're going to see a lot of chop pots. On top of that, as if playing Omaha and Hold'em at the same time wasn't enough, I did have some chess games going on the side for $25 a game. And if you guys ever want to play chess against me, you're pretty much guaranteed an easy 25 bucks. This next hand, the double straddle is on, there's an early position limper, and I look down at pocket 10s in the straddle. I kick it up to 120, and only the early position limper makes the call, so heads up here to a flop of 10-8 deuce rainbow. Seems like a pretty good one to me. I decided to bet small, seeing as we have the board pretty locked up, and there's not a lot of possible draws out there. Make it 70 bucks, and my opponent makes the call. Turn card is the 9 of diamonds. It's going to be a card that's much better for him than it is for me, so I check it over to him, but he does not check. He puts in a bet of $150. Don't really want to raise on this turn card, so I proceed with the call, and we're off to see one last card, which is the 6 of hearts. So what looked like a very good situation at the start has turned into a pretty mediocre one. I check it over to him once again, and this time he puts out a bet of $500. On one hand, it seems like a pretty straightforward fold, seeing as any hand containing a 7 now makes a straight. But on the other hand, my opponent could very easily know that, and therefore be using this run out to turn his hand into a bluff. Along with that, this is pretty much the best hand I would ever have that plays this way. So I think if we are going to call with some hands, top set seems to make the most sense, even though I expect to lose a good chunk of the time. So I put in the 500, and indeed, this is one of those times as my opponent shows 7-6 of spades. Moving right along to the next hand, where I look down at 8-7 of hearts in middle position, raise it up to $20, and get called by just the button. Flop comes down King Jack 6 rainbow with 1 heart. Most of the time I would bet small here and continue to bet on good turn cards. However, in this exact situation, I've actually played with this guy before quite a few times, and I notice he almost always bets when check to, so I think this hand's a good candidate to use as a check raise bluff. And that's what ends up happening. I check it over and he bets $15. Like I said, I think he's probably doing this too often, maybe with hands that he shouldn't really, like a jack or perhaps a really weak king. And those are all going to be in a tough spot against some aggression. So I kick it up to $60 and he does make the call. There's also the added factor that I just beat him at chess, by the way. Not really sure how much that's playing into this hand, but turn card comes out and it's like I handpicked it out of the deck. It's the 5 of hearts, giving us an open-ended straight flush draw. And man, if there was ever a card to keep bluffing on, it's got to be this one, right? I'm going to size up here and put all those one pair hands in a tough spot, or at least I hope. I throw in $200, and once again, my opponent makes the call. River comes off the 10 of hearts, so no help whatsoever. And now we have a decision between, do we want to just check and give up, or go for it? I think on this exact run out, it's pretty close. He is going to have some 2-pair combinations now that this 10 comes out, but at the same time, I would also have quite a few strong hands myself. So I decide, let's unload that final barrel. I throw in a purple chip, $500, and it takes him about 0.3 seconds to make the call. I proudly announce 8 high, to which he responds, no good, and shows me the king 5. So what looked like an amazing turn card actually ends up giving him a very strong hand, and one that he probably was never planning on folding. But I do like the play, and I gotta say, if he has king 5 there, he could also easily have king 7 or king 8, or just a bunch of other hands that would have had to fold the river, so certainly not mad at my play. Moving right along to the last hand of the night, in which the double straddle is on, so playing 5-5, 10-20, and I look down at king 7 of clubs in late position. Not the best hand ever, but good enough to raise in late position. At least I think it is. So I make it 60 bucks and just get called by the small blind. Heads up to a flop which comes down king 7-6 with 2 spades. Pretty damn good flop, not just because we've got top 2 pairs, but because there's so many available draws and kings to get some value from. So when he checks it to me, I don't expect him to fold any piece of this board or any draw whatsoever. I toss in $90 and my opponent makes the call. Off to a turn which is the jack of hearts. Much like on the flop, there's still plenty of worse hands to get some value from, as well as tons of draws now. So I throw in $290 this time, and I'm happy to see he's not done with the hand just yet, and makes the call again. So a pretty big pot building here, and we're off to see a river card, which is the ace of diamonds. Interestingly enough, now the small blind decides to take the lead in the hand and bet $640. Action's on me now, and even though we've got a pretty good hand, I gotta say, it's not the easiest spot ever. He could certainly have some better hands here, like maybe ace-jack of spades, queen-10 of spades, king-jack perhaps, that plays in a somewhat weird fashion. But on the other hand, there are a ton of missed draws on this board, and the way he's played this hand doesn't make a ton of sense to me, whether it's a good or bad hand. So I think it over for a minute and decide, hey, He's got a better hand, so be it. I call. My opponent says, good call, I missed. So I happily flip it over, and we're taking down a decently sized pot here to end this 5-5 session. That 5-5 session was a lot more action-packed than the 1-3 live stream on Wednesday. Granted, it was a bigger game, which also incorporated those double board PLO bomb pots. Anyway, I won around $2,500 on that day. So that's 2 for 2 here in Austin. And if you guys watched the previous vlog from California, you'll know I'm on a little bit of a win streak. So if I can book a win tonight, that'll be number 11. Obviously, it's a pretty silly mentality to have this in your mind, right? You should just play every hand as it comes, every session as it comes. But hey, I'm human just like everyone else. And I gotta admit, 11 in a row sounds kind of cool, right? Especially so when you consider that it's by far gonna be the toughest and biggest game that I'll play while I'm here in Texas. It's gonna be a 5-5-10, I think. No max. I'm probably gonna buy in for 5 or 10,000. Honestly, I haven't really given it much thought, but I bet you guys are probably tired of hearing me talk about it. You just want to see me play it, right? So,
From the Lodge Poker Club in beautiful Round Rock, Texas, welcome to Poker Night at the Lodge. My name is Slick Rick, along with my partner each and every week, Mikey the Skull Reisman. Mikey.
all right, here we are. Last session of the trip, playing some 5-5-10. I decided to buy in for $10,000. And in the first interesting one of the night, there's a double straddle on, so playing 5-5-10-20. And I look down at Queen 10 in late position. Good enough for a raise, I think, so I make it $60. And action gets to the small blind who decides 60 is not enough, kicks it up to 300. Action gets to the player in the $10 straddle who makes the call, and then the guy in the double straddle makes the call as well. Now the action gets back to me, and I don't think I can help myself in this spot but to put in yet another raise. Both of the guys who called in the straddle seems like if they had a really good hand, they would have re-raised the small blind. So really the only hand I'm concerned with is whatever the small blind's holding. So even though it's not really the best hand to do it with, I'd rather have an ace or a king in my hand. There's a lot of dead money out there. Why not? So I kick it up to $1,200, putting in the re-raise. And now the small blind's in a tough spot. Can't blame his fold. And luckily both of the players behind him fold as well. So a pretty quick hand to start the night here, but happy to pick up over $900 without a flop. Moving on to the next hand where Bart Hansen opens an early position to $20. Middle position player calls and now the button raises to $125. Action gets to me in the big blind and I look down at pocket tens. Don't really want a flat call here and open myself up to getting re-raised from Bart Hansen. So I think it's a spot where I'm going to be either raising or folding. You guys can probably guess what I did this time. Kick it up to $375 and only the button makes the call. So heads up here to a flop of Queen, Queen 4 rainbow. By the way, all that extra money on the button is a separate side game we were playing. More on that later. Anyway, I decided to bet small on this flop as we're either probably way ahead or way behind. Put out $250 and my opponent makes the call. Turn card is the 3 of clubs and I think now we're in a spot where we'd want to check a lot of our holdings, so that's what I do. And I'm happy to see my opponent checks it back. Off to a river, which is an offsuit 7. Again, a spot where we're either way ahead or way behind. And I think there's more value in just checking and seeing if he wants to bluff. So that's what I do. Turns out he's got ace king, so he checks it back. Probably expecting to win some percentage of the time, but not this time as we've got pocket tens. So take down the second pot of the night. And move on to the third hand where we're playing 5-5-10-20 yet again. This time yours truly is in the 20. We see an early position open to $65. Big blind makes the call and I look down at king 9 of spades. I think this hand functions just fine as a call here, but can sometimes be used as a re-raise as well. And I think this time I want to do that, especially since the big blind called. So I decided to make it $265. And I'm happy to see the initial raiser folds, but the big blind calls again. So best possible scenario here. We're in position heads up and going to a flop of 8-8-5 with 2 clubs and 1 diamond. Big blind checks it to me and obviously not much going on with my hand. But he doesn't know that. I could definitely have some over pairs or maybe some strong flush draws on this board. So I elect to bet $200 and he makes the call. Turn card is the deuce of hearts, not improving me whatsoever. But now the hand gets a little bit interesting when he decides to lead on this card for $475, right around half pot. Your reflex might just be to fold, obviously, because we have absolutely nothing. And honestly, I wouldn't really blame you with that line of thinking. However, the way I interpreted this bet in the moment was that he's either block betting with a draw or some sort of medium strength pair that doesn't want to face a ton of aggression. And I figured if I call here, we can easily win this hand on the river, either with a bluff to get him off a pair, or maybe just check back king high and beat some missed draws. So I decide I'm not done with it just yet and throw in the 475. And we're off to a river card here, which is the 10 of spades. Now the big blind thinks it over for quite a long time and eventually decides to check it. Now the action's on me, and I gotta be honest with you guys, I was really close to just checking this back here because I just had a feeling he had some sort of draw, and king high is good enough to beat the majority of draws on this board. However, I was a little bit concerned with maybe checking back and he shows me an ace high flush draw that missed, or maybe a hand like 5-6, or just some weak pair that would probably fold to a bet on the river. So I decided to play it safe and bet around half the size of the pot, just trying to get him to fold all his holdings, like I said, in case some of those holdings beat king high. Turns out in this case it wasn't necessary as we were ahead the whole time, but anyway, yeah, kind of an interesting hand and nice to hold up against a combo draw like he had. In the next one, it's 5-5, 10-20 again. Late position opens to $75. Small blind makes the call, and I look down in the big blind at ace queen of hearts. Definitely good enough for a re-raise, so I make it 390. And now the player in the double straddle decides 390 isn't going to cut it. Makes it 1200. A pretty damn strong play, but when the action gets back to me, these are cards I want to see a flop with. So even though I wouldn't really hate folding here, I decided to make the call and probably just going to go with it if I flop anything good. Unfortunately, the flop comes down 8-4 deuce, so not much going on. I check it over to him, he puts in a continuation bet, and I just have to fold, knowing that my opponent is capable of sometimes having ace-jack, ace-5 suited, maybe king-queen suited, hands of that nature, but not much I can do about it, honestly, since I would have a lot of stronger hands to continue with, so I let it go, and as you guys can see, this was one of those times as my opponent had king-jack. Nice hand by him. Now, do you guys remember how earlier I mentioned that game we were playing with money on the button? Well, it's time to explain that because that comes into play in this next hand. Pretty much what we were doing is every single hand, the button was putting $25 on the dealer button, but only the small blind can win that money. And until the small blind wins the pot, that $25 just continues to build up on the button. And it got pretty sizable. At this point, it was around $300 or $400. And yours truly is in the small blind, so only I can win that money this hand. I hope I'm explaining that right. Hopefully you guys get the idea. So here we go. In this hand, there's a late position open to $75, and I look down at 10 deuce offsuit. Now, is this a hand that you want to tangle with just to win $400? Probably not. Is it a hand that I decided to play in order to win that money? Yes, I did. So here we go. I made it $300. I figured, hey, this guy's opening in late position. He could have a ton of hands. Granted, I'm also not getting a ton of credit here since everyone knows about this small blind button game that we're playing. But alas, here we are. I make it 300, and it gets back to the initial raiser in late position who decides to make the call. So we're going to go to a flop here, which comes down Queen Jack 10 Rainbow. Flopping a pair seems pretty good to me. However, it's not really that strong of a hand, so I decide to check it and see what he does. And what he does is bet $275. I'm not done with it just yet, so I make the call, and we're off to a turn card here, which is the 4 of spades, bringing in a flush draw. Once again, I check it, and he continues betting to the tune of $800 this time, leaving himself with around 4,000 or 5,000 behind. This is where I start to really get off the rails and decide, hey, how nasty would it be to face a check raise here with pretty much any holding, since ace-king is the nuts in this spot, and my opponent would almost never have ace-king, seeing as he just flat called pre-flop. So I decided to turn my 10 into a bluff. I make it 1,800 to go, and I'm pretty much going to go all in on almost any river card. As you guys can see, this time a 10 was good, but he could easily have had maybe some better pairs like Jack 9, for example. Anyway, my opponent thinks it over for a while and ends up folding. Kind of an absurd hand, I gotta admit. But hey, at least we win that dead money on the button. Moving right along to the next hand, which was a $25 bomb pot. So around $225 in the middle to start. I look down at Queen 10 and we go to a 10 high flop. Action checks to the player on my right who bets 150. Nothing to do but proceed with the call, so that's what I do, and there's 3 other callers behind me. Turn card is the 9 of hearts. This time the action checks all the way around. River is the 3 of clubs, pairing the bottom card. Now the action checks to the player on my right again, just like it did on the flop, and he decides not to check it this time, but instead elects to bet $700. Kind of a tough spot here with top pair, but I couldn't really think of a worse hand he was betting, especially into a bunch of people still left to act, so I don't think about it too long and get out of the way. Turns out someone else does make the call with king 10 and ends up losing to pocket kings. So nice to not lose too much money in that one. In the next hand, I look down at ace 5 suited, playing 5-5, 10-20. Early position opens to 50, big blind makes the call. I decide to put in the re-raise, make it 250, and only the initial raiser calls in early position. Heads up to a flop of queen 9-6 with 2 spades, and I think I'm supposed to bet pretty big here, but I decide to check it. Now my opponent bets 200, and I think I'm supposed to check raise against that, but I end up just calling. Turn card is the deuce of hearts, it goes check, check. River is the deuce of diamonds. I think I'm supposed to bluff here. I end up checking it again, and he checks it back. Somehow, ace high is good. As you can see, he has king high, so we end up taking it down, but gotta admit, not really happy with how I played that one. On to the next hand where, once again, we're playing 5-5, 10-20. There's an early position open to 60, and I'm next to act with 6-5 of diamonds. Don't really want a flat call here and open myself to getting raised from someone behind, so I decide to do the raising myself. I make it 180. Now the action gets to Bart Hansen on the button, who decides 180 isn't going to cut it. Let's put in that re-raise to 525. As the action starts to fold back to me, I'm debating whether or not I'm going to make the call, seeing as Bart and myself are pretty deep here. Then the initial raiser calls the 525, and now I'm definitely in there, getting a good price and closing the action. So 3 ways to a flop of Jack 8-5 with 2 diamonds, and oh boy, I flopped a pair and a flush draw. Action checks to Bart, and he decides to put in a c-bet of $650, and now I'm thinking, how much am I going to check raise to, when I realize the player on my right does it first, all the way up to $2,500. Actually, $2,525 to be exact. Now I'm in a pretty nasty spot. I've got Bart left to act behind me. This guy on my right could easily have some bigger diamonds, or perhaps a hand like pocket jacks, pocket eights. So unfortunately, even though it looked like there would be some fireworks in this hand, I decided to just get out of the way, and Bart ends up folding as well, even though he had top pair. So not a ton of action in this hand, but I thought it was a pretty interesting one. In the next hand, we have the triple straddle going, so 5-5, 10, 20, 40, and you guys can probably take a good guess as to who's in the 40. We see an early position open to 100. Player in the $20 straddle makes the call, and I decide to complete the triple straddle with Jack 10. Off to a flop 3 ways, which comes down King, Queen 7, rainbow. First player checks, I check it, and now the pre-flop raiser bets $100. Player on my right folds, but I'm certainly not folding, seeing as we flopped an open-ender to the nuts. I decide to just call. We're off to a turn card, which is the 5 of clubs, bringing in a backdoor flush draw. I check it. This time my opponent checks it back. River now is the 6 of hearts, and we end up with Jack high. Now, let's think about this hand a little bit. My opponent raised pre-flop, bet the flop, and then checked back the turn. What I interpret that as is a hand that's pretty good, but not really good enough to bet 3 streets for value. And what kind of hands are those in this situation? Well, maybe King Jack, King 10 suited, Ace Queen, Queen Jack, hands of that nature. And they're all going to be in a really tough spot against an overbet, I think. I also have one of the worst hands I would really ever have in this spot, but could very easily have some strong hands like King 7, Queen 7 suited, perhaps 7-6 suited, etc., etc. You guys get the idea. So for all these reasons, I decide it's time to bet twice the size of the pot. $1,000, just like I would with strong hands in this situation. And now my opponent goes in the tank for a few minutes before eventually deciding to let it go. So this one gets through, and we take down the last noteworthy hand of the stream. Well, last night was a lot of fun, to put it lightly. Unfortunately, after the stream ended, I ended up playing the biggest pot of my life. And the reason I say unfortunately is because obviously I would have preferred that it was captured on camera. Either way, I gotta tell you guys about it. However, I am running just a few minutes late to catch a flight back to California. So let's head to the airport and I'll talk to you guys there.
Mr. Emilio Hayes, please check in, please. American Airlines gate number 23 area. Please check in with the agent, please. American Airlines gate number 23, please, for found property.
You know, as someone who's flown out of LAX multiple times now, I really appreciate the Austin airport. This place is like extremely simple compared to LA. Anyway, I promised you guys a hand, so here it goes. Biggest pot of the night. This was about 5 or 10 minutes after the stream ended. And it went like this. There was an early position open to $60. The double straddle was on, so this hand is 5, 5, 10, 20, I believe. Yours truly is in the 20. There's a call from the small blind, and I decided to call in the straddle with ace-3 of diamonds. So 3 ways here to a flop of jack 10-9 with 2 diamonds. Small blind checks it, I decided to check it, and the pre-flop raiser checks as well. So we go 3 ways still to a turn card here, which is the 3 of spades. So now we make bottom pair to go along with our flush draw. Small blind checks once again, and I think this is a spot where an overbet makes a lot of sense. Pre-flop raiser is mostly going to have 1 pair tops on a board like this, and he's going to be in a tough spot calling on the turn and river. So I make it $300. Pre-flop raiser does make the call, and now the small blind decides to check raise, but it's pretty small. He makes it $875, $575 for me to call. We're getting a pretty good price here. A 3 could easily make the best hand, as well as a diamond, obviously. So I proceed with the call, and the player behind me, who was the pre-flop raiser, gets out of the way. So now we're heads up to a river in a pretty sizable pot, but at least I'm in position, so feeling pretty good about that, and feeling even better when the king of diamonds rolls off on the river. So now we make the second nuts, losing only to queen 10 of diamonds specifically. Good news is that the small blind decides to continue betting, and pretty sizable as well. He makes it $1,800. He's got around $6,000 left behind, maybe $7,000. I covered him at this point, so still plenty of money left behind. Now it's just a question of how much we want to raise to, and I think in this spot, a big raise doesn't really make a lot of sense because I wouldn't have a ton of bluffs given this run out and the way the hand played out. So I decided to make it $4,000. It's going to be pretty gross if he moves all in for $7,000 at this point. Believe it or not, I would not be happy about that at all, but after thinking for a few seconds, he elects on just a call. Obviously, based on that action, we're going to be winning, and indeed that's the case as he shows queen 8 of diamonds. Basically just a cooler, but that's often going to be the case when you have a $10,000 plus pot at a 5-5-10 game. And that actually ended up making most of my night. I was in for 11,000 and cashed out for 19,572. Pretty sizable win, just over $8,500, and that's actually my biggest win ever, both on and off the vlogs. And as you guys can probably guess, I'm extremely happy with that result. And even more so that I was able to get a cool vlog out of it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. I know it was a little bit longer than usual. But anyway, that's a wrap for today, guys. As always, thanks so much for the support. Thank you for everyone who showed some love on the live stream. And if you watched all the way to the end and gave this video a thumbs up, I really appreciate it. All right, guys, until next time, good luck at the tables. Peace.